Okay, so welcome to seminar 2 of the Violence Interrupted seminar series that we're doing this November. Like I said last week, it started off because I was having a conversation with Gwenton over the weekend about how many young people had been stabbed and the murder that had occurred 3 weeks ago. So it was a conversation that was had, and then an idea that came together about, let's start having some live conversations where we can look at finding some solutions to really look at and combat serious youth violence, because it is getting out of hand. And unfortunately, I am shattered today because, one of my young men was killed on Thursday. So as a team, we've been dealing with that, and personally, dealing with that because, it is very real. It's very authentic. I think everyone involved is doing this because we care, and this is what our lives are and our professional careers are. So, in the last week, it's become more and more relevant to me that we all start having these conversations and really start a movement of practicality and actually things that we can do, and spreading the learning and making sure that the learning isn't costing an arm and a leg and everyone can have access to information. It's very, very important to me. So for those who are tuning in that don't know who I am, and I'm going to get to you in a minute, Amanda, and get you to introduce yourself. My name is Whitney Iles. I have 13 years experience working with children and young people. Around 9 of those have been specifically in the serious youth violence sector. For the last 4 years, I have been working in the prison system with 16 to 25-year-olds, both men and women. My organisation, Project 507, we work around violence reduction. So when we're in the prisons or in the community, we tend to work and engage with people that are or that have been affected by violence, and whether they're perpetrators or victims, it tends to be, a very thin line that a lot of the individuals are, moving up and down at any one time. I also study at the Tavistock and Portman clinic, and I've done a lot of training around trauma and violence, and I'm trying to bring the clinical aspect of the work to the real hardcore grassroots. So anyone who missed out on last week's seminar was an introduction to violence, and I had 2 amazing guest speakers, Gwenton Soley, who is an amazing grassroots worker, and he's also an author. So he has From the Streets to Scotland Yard and a few other books out at the moment, which I really recommend people go in and get in and having a read. And Raymond Douglas, who again is another amazing grassroots worker who has almost 20 years, 15, 20 years in the field, from Birmingham. So we're making it more of a UK perspective and not just a London thing. So if you want to go see that, that's, you can watch that on my Blab, but you can also watch it on YouTube. I'm going to put everything on YouTube, and it's youtube.com/Violence Interrupted UK. And if you want to engage on the Twitter and ask questions, ask for books around the different subjects, or just to be pointed in any right direction to learn more, please use the hashtag. Look, this is how prepared I am this week. Yeah. Hashtag Violence Interrupted UK, even though I bet that looks like the opposite way around. I'm not too sure. But hey, this is me with all my resources. Just some ground rules for the Blab, for the YouTube. I'm bringing different people together because I feel like we need a lot of different points of view in order to come up with some solutions. So anyone watching, anyone taking part, it's about keeping an open mind and, be willing to hear different people's point of views. I don't like blaming. I'm not really on this whole blaming thing. I want to come up with solutions rather than saying, it's this people's fault or that person's fault. So no blaming, be respectful, and just understand everything's getting recorded. So if there's something that you don't want, or on camera or being recorded, someone needs to let me know so I can turn it off and turn it back on afterwards. I tend to speak from a more, my vision for this kind of seminar series was to focus more so on young men, and the young men between, the 16 and 25, just because that's where I spend most of my time working at the moment, but it's not exclusive to that. But when I speak, just be mindful that's where my kind of perspective is coming from. And for those who are watching that are currently on live, and I'm going to make sure that I say this again later, it would be good just for people to let us know where they're coming from. You know, if you're community worker, parent, community member, probation, parole, whatever, it's just nice to monitor where everyone's coming from. People have been pushing these seminars out through a lot of different platforms, and I just want to monitor that. So that's my kind of housekeeping out of the way, and I probably spoke way too fast, and everyone will tell me off later on. But I do have a guest. I know I'm going to have a couple more in a moment, but before we get to them, Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself and just say a little bit about your background and, you know, where you work and, you know, the spiel, as they say?
Yeah. Well, my name is Amanda Wood. I've got around 12 years experience in the criminal justice field. I came from a housing perspective at Camden Council, worked for a New Deals for Communities programme in Kilburn, where I eventually became the theme manager for crime and community safety. I then worked at, and that was where I first got real experience of kind of youth violence and some of the inequalities and the way, the challenges that surrounded young people, really. I then started working for Birmingham City Council. I relocated to Iles in a children's centre there. Again, the same issues, same challenges, and same sets of services that were working separately to try and make a difference, but all in very different ways and sometimes with very conflicting philosophies. Mm-hmm. I then spent around 7 years at Samwell working for the Community Safety Partnership there, and latterly at Targeted Youth Support there, which was implementing the Ending Gangs and Serious Youth Violence strategy, which was challenging, but that was the whole partnership approach there and the whole ethos around understanding the journey. I think it was really important in how that was implemented. I then became involved with the Home Office peer review team and the peer review network around ending gangs and serious youth violence, and took part in peer reviews around the country, and started really realising some of the connections and some of the ways that vulnerable young people were targeted, you know, as part of almost systematic abuse, really, and how that perspective isn't widely known and isn't widely then influenced in the approaches that lots of statutory organisations take. In January 2015, I set up SIProjects, my own company. I've worked with Mentoring West Midlands there to redevelop their training materials for perpetrators of domestic violence, encouraging, you know, empathetic approaches and psychological interventions to create change, really, and understand that change is possible. I'm working with Walsall Domestic Violence Forum as well on a lottery bid for perpetrators and victims, working in a much more systematic fashion, and trying to address some of the outcomes from domestic homicide reviews that tell us that it's not as simplistic as victim perpetrator, you know, toxic trio of mental health, domestic violence, and you know, drug and alcohol issues, have led to a number of people dying and being victims of domestic violence that have not been known to domestic violence services, and may well have been known to one service, but they haven't been known collectively, and there hasn't been sometimes there's a risk assessment done, but there hasn't actually then been a safety plan put in place. And I think things like that are quite interesting. So that's kind of my background, and my passion really is a much more collective and much more partnership approach, where we try and look more at root causes instead of really applying sticking plasters. You know, lots of ways the funding was given or has been given or is still given where it is is just for issue based. You know, it's to address domestic violence, or it's to address drug and alcohol, and you know, that addresses the symptoms. It doesn't address the causes.
Well, that was a brilliant summary. That was a lot. It sounds like you've had an amazing career. You've done a lot. I'm quite blown away now. I'm not quite sure what to say. It amazes me how many people have been in the field for such a long time, yet there's so many of us that haven't connected. And you know, we met during Raymond Douglas's lab that he did on September 21st. You know,
where I sounded like a Dalek.
Where, you know, but it's nice now that we can start using the platforms to get together. And I just, you know, I want to say thank you to everyone that got involved last week, because, you know, I've had messages all throughout the week saying, you know, oh, you know, I watched your blab, or I watched it on YouTube. I'm now speaking to so-and-so, and the different are now connected, and people behind the scenes are connecting. And we've got another, we're going to do another 3 seminars after this one. So today's focus, I want to start looking a little bit more at trauma, so we can get to the underlying issues, you know, that why violence is there in the first place. Next week, I'm going to be looking in more depth specifically around knife and gun crime, because, you know, that's a huge thing. I'm trying to stay away from gangs and just focus on the actual violent acts, because we can have knife crime that's gang related, but we can also have knife crime that's not gang related. And, you know, if we start debating gangs, that's a whole, you know, we could do a whole month on what is a gang and a gang member anyway. And then
it distracts the issue as well. Yeah.
And then the week after, looking at prison and violence, and how does prison generate more violence than it stops, or does it prevent violence? What are the issues there? Because I you know, I work in prison, so, you know, I deal with a lot on a day-to-day basis, and I do think that it needs to be spoken about, and we need to find some solutions. And then I've saved the kind of my hot topic until last, and looking at the effects that sentencing has, like long sentences. So we've got a lot of young people in on joint enterprise. We've got a lot of children and young people in on murder sentences for life, and actually wanting to pick apart what does it really mean, and what is the effects of sending putting a 15-year-old in prison for an 18-year, you know, minimum tariff sentence, and how does that affect the community? So as much as the seminars are about violence, it still is quite focused around serious youth violence and young people that are involved in the criminal justice system. And today, I'm just waiting for him to get, well, I know Ariel missed his train, so I'm hoping he'll be online in the next couple of minutes. But Ariel Nathanson is from the Tavistock and Portman clinic. So he is a psychotherapist, and I've asked him to actually come be involved in today's session to do a bit of a presentation. So I'm hoping that his presentation will give us a lot of things to talk about. So in the meantime, we're going to fill, because you know, it's real, it's live, it's on. And then later on this evening, I've just spoken to him now, Craig from Real Action UK, who I think you met briefly on the last one. He's going to join in and you know, share his perspective. So I'm just going to kick things off while we wait for Ariel. Trauma and young people, to me, is just absolutely huge, and I can't believe how little it's being spoke about at the moment. If you were to start anywhere on the kind of trauma spectrum at the moment, where would that be? What is your hot topic at the moment?
For me, it would probably be around sexual violence, to be honest, and the disturbing increases in sexual violence, and the misunderstandings and misrepresentations of consent, and how confused that whole picture is for young people, I think, at the moment. I went to see Zoe Lodrick at the weekend on Saturday, and she's a speaker around sexual violence and our base responses to to sexual violence, and that freeze, flop and friend are perfectly legitimate responses to a stress situation, just as fight or flight would be. And it's how we kind of, I guess, look at the behaviours and the attitudes that condone that, because I think they're quite similar for that and youth violence. And some of the trauma that also sits behind that in domestic violence or sexual violence, and what those young people have witnessed, and how we work in kind of whole family, whole community approaches to create a much more empathetic response. And also, I guess it's another thing that came out from the event on Saturday for me was the amount of time that really traumatised young people are cut off from services because they don't attend appointments. And actually, that not attending an appointment is more of a cry for help than anything else. You know, and when a young person, for example, is telling you to F off from up the stairs, and then the third time they come in and actually tell it to your face, that's progress.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess it's how for me, it would be how we train all frontline practitioners to have that perspective, so that, you know, we create less of this pinball approach and, be a bit more civilized, I suppose, and less draconian in our response.
Because the way I, you know, do my best to work is with a very curious approach. I'm always looking to see, actually, why is this young person acting like this? Why is the violence that is being perpetrated, why is it this way and not this way? What's really going on? What's the underlying issue there? And I found it really interesting that so many people don't think about that. And I think this is the culture that we need to start creating, a culture of curiosity. Yeah, because I was in, you know, one of the reasons why I chose to do this on a Monday night is because I spend Monday in lectures all day. So this morning we were having lectures around attachment and also child development and trauma, and actually how being in the womb, you know, and what the mother is experiencing while we are in the womb, or why our child is in the womb, actually has a huge impact on how that child develops. And if that mother is going through stress and anxiety, it has an effect on the child and how the child develops and how the child grows, even in the first kind of, you know, 3-4 weeks, months, you know, the early stages that you just think, you know, it never really occurred to me. And I think, to me, this is why it is more of a society issue, and we as a community members need to understand trauma a little more, because it affects all of us, and there isn't any real separation. You know, everyone, I think in you know, European standards, we're very individual, and it's you and it's me and it's her over there and him there. But actually, you know, we're all so joined and we're also combined. And, you know, if there's trauma in an area, it's affecting everyone, even down to, you know, the fetus. And to me, it's just, you know, it's about how do we start tracing you know, there's two things. It's how do we start looking at, you know, the violence perpetrators, and where does that violence come from? And because you're right, because most perpetrators have been victims at some point of their lives. And then also, how do we create societies that can deal with trauma? Because I think there's always going to be trauma, but it's like, how do you deal with it? Because you know, there's evidence that if a mother goes through a traumatic experience while pregnant, if she is comforted in the right way and looked after in the right way, the child still develops that emotional resilience to trauma. Whereas if the mother isn't comforted in the right way, the way that the child will develop, you know, there will be an off balance. And I find those things just extremely interesting, and it plays more into the, you know, the belief of violence really a health issue, and it's a public health issue, because it's all of us. So is there, you know, I know you were speaking more so on the sexual violence. at the moment, and that being more of a topic of your focus. Is there, if you could teach one thing to every single worker that works with children and young people that are in prison, for example, for sexual offences, if you could give out one bit of understanding, one bit of knowledge around working with children and young people that are in on sex offences, what would the understanding be? What would you want more people to be thinking about?
I guess some of it's about what it's like to be a teenager and not putting our adult perspectives on those, and understanding that lots of what we think is normal or safe or whatever is learnt. We learnt that, you know, and that was because people nurtured us, or, you know, we learned through mistakes or whatever. But, you know, a non-judgmental, more empathetic approach, I think, which is hard. I think it's a hard concept for it. Really pushes up against society and what society would like to condone. And I think that shows up in things like Sex in Class. I don't know if you saw that on Channel 4, but looking at 14, 15-year-olds and their attitudes to sex and what they're learning from pornography means that they have a completely different attitude and outlook to sex and relationships and power and pleasure and all those things. And I think we need a complete change in how we teach that and how we communicate with young people about it.
Definitely.
That makes sense.
Yes, it does. I'm just seeing Ariel. Ariel, I know you're there listening. Can you call in, please? There we go. That was like perfect timing. Just waiting for it to connect. It's like the anticipation. Come on, let's go. Aha!
Reminded me of last time.
Here I am.
We've just been waiting for you. Anticipation.
Sorry I'm late.
Don't worry about it. So, this is Amanda. I don't know what side you're on. You're this side for me, but you might be that side for you.
Hello.
We were starting the conversations. Amanda gave a introduction to who she is and her background, and we've just been having a bit of a conversation about trauma, and very kind of basic, starting to understand how trauma plays a part in violence. But we were more filling to wait until you got involved in the conversation as well.
Okay.
So I would like to just kind of hand over to you, and if you introduce yourself and also just say a little bit about the Portman Clinic as well. And what I'll do is I'll leave it for you to speak a little bit, because I'm hoping you prepared a little something to speak about. And then once you're finished, we'll join back in the conversation. And also I have another member, Craig, who will be joining probably around another 5-10 minutes. He might just call in at that point, but we'll add him in at that point. So over to you.
Okay. I did prepare a little bit. I thought I imagined us having a bit of a conversation about it, but I prepared a few just sort of highlights in the way I think or we think about trauma and how it might relate to violence too. A little bit about the Portman Clinic is a...
And you as well.
and me. The Portman Clinic is a very old institution that is there to work psychoanalytically with people presenting as violent, delinquent, or sexually perverse. That's our main work, and has been this way for many years. And they're working with young people and children, and sometimes families and networks. I'm a consultant child and adolescent psychotherapist by profession. What I thought about the way to start with trauma, I thought would be a good idea just to have a definition, just to make sense, and also to notice something about the definition of trauma. There are many definitions of trauma. The psychoanalytic one is that the trauma is a life event that is defined by its intensity and the impact it has on whoever is there to experience it, and by the upheaval and the lasting effect it has on someone. Now, if you think about this as a definition, it's very subjective. It doesn't say anything about which event will be a trauma, and it doesn't say anything about the person who's going to be experiencing it, which means that a lot of things can be traumatic to a lot of people. But what it means is that subjectively the person experiences something as overwhelming, and it has a very detrimental, long-lasting effect on them. Now, another very important definition and very important distinction to make would be between trauma as an event and trauma as a relationship. Usually when people think about trauma, they think about events. They think about terrible events, wars, car crashes, violence. But they think about something that happens once or twice. Mainly what we work with, I think most of people working with violence in the streets would work with people who have been subjected to relational trauma. Relational trauma is not one event. It's a chronic, traumatic experience that repeats all the time, which is part of a relationship. Now, that changes everything. And that, I came in at the tail end of your chat with Amanda, and I think that this is probably what Amanda might have been talking about. That you have trauma that is there from infancy, and you have trauma that starts a bit after. But any relational trauma is long-lasting and is not just an event. Okay? It's part of a relationship, which is fundamental. And most of the people we work with, this is what they had. They didn't have one event or two events that traumatized them. Now, I once had a kind of an old professor that gave me a very good definition to how to place trauma within development. Now, most of the traumas that I'll be thinking about are childhood traumas. And the young people that you'll be working with or you are working with, this is what they had. Childhood trauma, it's a bit schematic, but I think for me it makes sense, and it's kind of easy to think about it in this way. If you think about the timeline of life, the little line ahead of us, where it starts, and the childhood, and you place trauma at some point during this childhood timeline. Now, the earlier the trauma starts, if it's a relational trauma, the earlier it starts, the worse it is, as it were, because it colors more of the development in its traumatic colors. If you place it as a little dot in the middle of the line, now what you see after that is how this child is coping with the trauma. You don't necessarily see trauma, you see how it's being coped with. The most, the trauma, if you think about the definition, it relates both to what is happening and also to who the person is. The more severe the trauma is, the more likely it is to create a huge blob in the middle of development. If you think about trauma, if you think about your young people, slightly older young people, or anybody that have been through traumatic experiences, you can imagine this sort of line, and you can imagine how they coped without trauma. Now you can divide, again, completely schematically, you can divide people into a couple of types, basically. One is that the personality, the minute the trauma starts to occur, let's say relationally, the personality develops as an organization around coping with that trauma, and it sort of revolves around it, as it were. Obviously moves on, but it moves on in this kind of revolving fashion. That everything, the core of the personality, is dealing with that trauma. Okay, and that's a really intense stuckness around it. If you want to think about something which is a bit lighter in terms of the trauma, if the trauma can be coped with a bit better, or if the trauma is not that severe, or it happens at a time where the personality is more formed, then you'll think you'll have that blob on the line, and then development will kind of take a blip, go up, and try to kind of maneuver around it and continue. And if at some point in the future something presents itself as a challenge, it might then slide back into the trauma and evolve around that again, because this is where something got stuck. Okay? For me, that's a really nice way of thinking about it and differentiate between various kind of clinical phenomena that I see. Now, the other thing that is interesting to think about in relation to trauma is that you hardly ever, when you see people, or you see people who've been traumatized relationally, you hardly ever see the trauma in them when you talk to them. You don't see trauma. You don't see what had happened to them at all. They don't tell you. What you do see is how they cope with it. And how they cope with it usually is not something that they'll be able to tell you about as well. But if, for example, if I think about violence, and I think about the simple trauma of, for example, not simple, but for example, living in a domestic violence environment, or being physically abused as children, the most significant experience of that would be the humiliation and pain and belittleness of being in that environment and helplessness. Now, someone who has been through this experience is not, when you are in contact with them, you're not necessarily going to see someone who is a victim. You're not necessarily going to see someone who is humiliated, beaten, and collapsed. You might see, on the other hand, someone who is very puffed up, powerful, omnipotent, and often quite violent. And what you might then experience in relation to them, if you're not their friend, is humiliation and belittleness and passivity and fear. So what a lot of violent people have in common, and violent people who are coping through their violence with past traumatic events, what they will have in common is a part of their coping mechanism is to put these traumatic, awful experiences that they cannot relate to in other people. So it's not enough just being violent. It's not just kind of an activity that happens in thin air, in a vacuum. It has to have another. It has to be relational. It's not a punching bag doesn't work, really. It has to be a real person, because a real person can have real feelings. A punching bag doesn't get humiliated, passive, and scared. Other people do. So, if you walk down an alley in a kind of a wrong postcode, and you see a couple of guys walking sort of in front of you, you're not going to think about them as traumatized people. You're going to feel really scared. That would be, in a way, what they do, as it were, in order to cope with their trauma. Thinking whether I have any other snippets of cleverness to say.
Well, don't give it to us all at once, save it. I just want to take.
Maybe I should stop here.
Yeah, stop there for a minute. I just want, Craig, do you want to, I can see you're in the building. Do you want to call in and join the conversation? There we go. This is working great today. Touch wood before it all goes horrifically wrong. Hey, Craig, how are you?
Are you doing it all right?
I'm good.
Is my signal good from this side?
Pardon?
Is my signal good from this side?
Yeah, your signal is good. There is a little bit of mic problems somewhere. Someone's got something squeaking, but it's not too bad. I'm hoping it's not me. Craig, real quick, do you want to just do a quick kind of 60-second who you are, what you do, where you're from, to bring you into the conversation?
I'm from Birmingham, criminologist, youth and community worker, urban youth specialist, most recently a lecturer at the University College of Birmingham. A lot of my work is predominantly with young people in and around the northwest part of Birmingham, predominantly young people that are violent, young people that are in gangs, and also young people that are victims of violence.
Brilliant. So welcome. Hope you had a good day. So does anyone want to kind of start us off or start the conversation from where we were just left off? Anyone have any thoughts?
I think Ariel made some brilliant points in regards to trauma. I mean, I didn't catch the first part of what he was saying, but the last part around this idea of young people, they create almost personalities and strategies, a way of dealing with the trauma. And I see that quite a lot in regards to a lot of the young men that I work with. You have young men that have heard of multiple incidents in the community where people have been shot, people have been stabbed, and it's almost become the norm where they perceive that as normality in their environment. And reality it actually isn't. So I understand the point where he made in regards to them developing personalities to deal with that. And sometimes them personalities is what we see in the community of them either being violent to other people or being violent towards themselves. So I just thought that was an interesting point. And I think with a lot of the recent shootings and stabbings that have been happening up Birmingham, and I've just been reading a couple of articles. There was a couple of stabbings and one murder on the weekend up in London. So it kind of just brings forth a lot of what people have been discussing in regards to the issue of trauma, and really what is happening with our young people in terms of where their minds are at. And more to take a step further is really about what is the current response, because we know that there's trauma, we know that young people.
Yeah. Oh, I think we've lost Craig for a second. So, Amanda, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just picking up saying how we create more of that understanding of what sits behind young people's behaviour and take some of that threat out of it. I think that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I don't know whether it's campaigns or, but certainly, how you engage with different groups. Yeah, I just think there are some interesting questions to be raised from this.
Sorry, Craig, we lost you for a minute. Do you want to finish off what you were saying?
No, I was saying that at different levels, there needs to be an understanding of what needs to be done in terms to respond to the violence. I think on the ground level, I think one needs to be raising awareness of what trauma is and how that impacts on the lives of the young people that are in our communities. And then the second level is understanding what trauma is and what does it look like. And then thirdly, how do we respond from a parent level, community level, education level, whether that's within faith institutions, and then also what can the statutory services do in order to respond to the issue. And then lastly, what should the government also be doing? but we understand that the issue of youth violence in our country is not seen as a public health issue. It's seen as a criminal justice one.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that we see violence being engaged is predominantly someone gets arrested, somebody then goes to prison, and then we see the same cycle going over and over and over again. But there needs to be what I call a public health response. And there needs to be a wraparound service in the way that we address violence. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's many projects in the community that seek to interrupt the violence that takes place in a range of different places, and they're doing brilliant work. But there needs to be more of a national approach, which is understood by the government to respond to youth violence. If you can have people in society that have issues or victims of substance misuse, alcoholism, and etc., and you can damn near go to a phone box now and phone and call for a service to support you. But if you have a young man or a young woman that says, I want to get out of a gang right now, what service is there to respond to them? You know, what service is there to respond to them? No different to a woman in distress because her partner is being domestically violent. Where are the services for young people? So then what happens is it becomes a pressure on individuals like ourselves to respond to that, but we oftentimes don't have the resources to do that, or we've only got little bits of funding in order to respond. So my argument needs to be one that we need to respond to it slightly different on different levels. And I think as a government as a whole, we need to respond to it, not as a criminal justice issue, rather than a public health one.
So I completely agree with what you're saying in regards of making it a public health issue. One of the aims of this platform is to start providing knowledge and a language to those people who are interested in this subject but might not know how to express themselves or want to understand a little bit more. So this is why I think today is more so around understanding trauma, so we can actually get the message out there to, you know, this is what we're seeing, but this is what's really going on underneath the surface. So more people, more practitioners, more members, more parents can actually start going to those in power and say, actually, now I understand what a public health issue is in regards to violence. Now I understand trauma. Now I'm starting to understand serious youth violence. Let's start having a conversation where we can use the language to explore and to explain what's really going on. So just to actually be active now on what you were saying about people need to start understanding trauma. That's why we have, you know, 3-4 different worlds and different perspectives together. Let's actually see if we can pick apart what's going on in our communities, because we've got the grassroots, we've got the criminal justice background, and we've got the psychotherapist, the clinical background. Bringing us all together right now can be very powerful into pulling apart the cases, to show the different perspectives in one place, so we can get more people understanding and more people discussing. Because when we just say public health, and that, us in the room understand, us in the conversation understand what we mean by that, but there's plenty of people across the board that don't know, and we need to spread that message. So,
and I think that links to the point I was making about the different levels.
Yeah,
because the conversation that we're having right now, to a parent that is a victim of somebody shooting or stabbing her son on the weekend, the conversation what we're having right now is not going to be valid. What she needs is reassurance, she needs support, and she needs help. So I think that when we have these conversations, and it's important, like you said, that we need to know what level we're talking at and who we can respond to at what particular time, because some of us are in the position to work with those in the criminal justice system. Those of us are privileged to work with individuals at academic level or at statutory level. And I think it's, once we understand what the levels are, what can we do at each stage to our best of our ability to engage, because that parent that's out there right now, all she wants to understand is what's happening to my son, what's happening to my daughter, you know, how do I respond to this particular issue? So I think part of the first level, when I said about awareness, is one, like you said, understanding or raising the awareness of what trauma is. And number two, what that understanding is and what that looks like every single day. What does that look like in terms of the way that young people behave, the way that people's children behave, the way that people behave in schools, where people behave just generally on the street. And I think part of the work that we're all doing kind of helps with the support. So those that are watching and don't understand the issues of trauma might support them in understanding of where they fit in terms of the jigsaw of responding to this issue. Because the issue is huge. All of us can't do that at one particular time, but everybody has a role to play.
So can we just take a moment to talk about the trauma that is growing up in violent communities, whether you've experienced violence physically directly in your household or you've been around these communities? Because what we've got now is a lot of young people that have lost a lot of friends through murder, through serious youth violence, and also lost a lot of friends to the criminal justice system. And it seems, you know, from my perspective, there's a lot of trauma and undealt with trauma going on there. I was watching, actually, let me not go even into that at the moment. So let's just have a conversation and break it down a little bit to what's going on in our community. I mean, Ariel, we've done a lot of work together over the last 2-3 years, having these kind of discussions. And if there was something from your perspective that you would like to reach out and be able to share information to those who are not necessarily getting clinical training or clinical supervision, is there anything that comes to mind that, you know, in regards to knowledge and information that you would like to share, or a thought process that has, you know, come to mind during this conversation?
Well, a couple of points. One is very simple. It's something that we've been talking about a lot, which is that for me, sitting at the clinic means that I hardly ever get to see any of the people you work with, which is a great shame. And one thing is to just say, well, it's not going to happen because they're not going to make this distance. It's not going to work out. I will never see them in the clinic. And another thing to do is what we've been doing, because if we work together, then I'm involved in what you do, and some of the work you then carry with you on the grassroots level is then a bit different. It makes it possible for me to contribute to work that is done outside the clinic, far away from the clinic and the setting and the boundaries of the clinic suggests, but still be quite be able to contribute to this from my thinking, from the clinical way of thinking about stuff, which means that if we can form teams like that, or kind of rings, if you think about it as sort of rings of containment, where you have the ground level community workers who work and develop face-to-face relationships with young people all the time, and then around them you have another ring of people who are slightly more experienced, but they kind of hold them together. They think with them about their work. They function as kind of mentors or team leaders or whatever it might be. They help to kind of manage their work with them. If you think around them, there's another ring of people, a bit more experienced, a bit more able to contain those people who contain the other people. And in one of those rings, I fit in quite well. And if we think about working in these type of kind of containment rings, it means that the work that is done at the ground level is much better informed, is more contained, is actually more properly therapeutic. So if you think about that as a model, I think that's a model that can work pretty well. And doesn't involve just me seeing whoever makes it through the threshold to the clinic, or people just working as community worker, or people just working on one level. I mean, a lot of people can work in many levels and influence their work. Another point that I thought about is more kind of like a clinical, theoretical, or thought about violence, is that it's really important to think about two kinds of violence when you think about violence, because violence in itself is not a bad thing. You know, violence is a capacity that everybody has, and you need to use it if you're under serious threat. If you don't use it under serious threat, you're in trouble. So if we can think about violence as a reaction to threat, which can be positive, depending what the threat is. Mm-hmm. And you can think about violence as more sadistic violence, and it's more chronic violence, as something someone has to be as a trait in order to control another person. And that's something very different, very different. That's something that has to exist within a relationship, within a relation to in a community or in a gang, and has to be there all the time. Because if it's not there, the person cannot work out whatever they need to work out. So it's really important to differentiate between more controlling sadistic violence, violence which is just a reaction to threat. Now, if you live in a community in which you're under threat all the time, it means you could be hypervigilant. It means you could be under stress constantly. And it means that in most likelihood, you will have to be violent a lot.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can't survive. Now, within this community, you will also have individuals who have, if we think about the developmental idea of trauma, of relational trauma, if you grow up with this in this community, and if you suffer this violence for a very early age, and if you don't feel that there's anybody there, any adults there to protect you and to look after you in a benevolent way, your whole personality will be organized around coping with this violence. And then there's some likelihood you'll be more sadistic, that you'll need violence in order to control others, that you need it as part of your personality, and you won't be able to survive properly without it. Without it, you'll break down. And these are the more ill people in the community. From our thoughts, my surprise as a clinician was to find out through you that a lot of the young men you work with in prison and in the community are not necessarily psychopathic. I don't think. They might not even have very serious personality disorders. They might, because after a while you grow kind of rigid with the way you cope with stuff, and when you're rigid and kind of crusty, it turns into a personality disorder at some point. But most of them, I can imagine, if you put them in a different environment, in a kind of a rehab type. Give them a kind of a rehab type experience in which they do not need to be hypervigilant. They do not need to have violence in order to survive. They might move on. They might be able to look at the trauma in a different way. They might be able to do something different. I think that your work is very hopeful, because most of these young people, although they're stuck in the most horrible ways, really, and feel quite hopeless and stuck in gangs and many other sort of unhealthy institutions, most of the violence is quite reactive, not so much sadistic. That's an interesting observation for me.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you there, because what I've seen from my own personal experiences, it has been a lot more reactive. It doesn't feel like we're dealing with young people with really deep mental health issues. It's something that's developed over time, and that we're dealing with young people that are in positions where they do feel like they have to survive, and they do feel like they have to protect themselves. And it's really shocking to me that we take them out of these environments where they feel like that's what they need to do to cope, and we put them in an environment that's probably twice worse, and we expect them to rehabilitate in situations where they still need to be almost hyper paranoid, and it feeds into the trauma, and then it feeds into the violence. And we talk about these young men and young women who have been through so much, and a lot of their behavior is, their bodily behavior is trying to remove themselves from their thought processes. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the enactment. We're seeing the trauma come through the behaviour because it can't be thought about. And then we lock them in rooms for 23 hours a day with no TV and expect them to behave and not be violent. When actually what we're doing, you know, it feels like we're increasing that violence because we're putting them in a situation where they have to think about, or they're being put face to face with their trauma, having no professionals around, no people around to contain it. And I think, you know, the containment is a huge issue.
If you want to help people deal with violence, you need to put them in an environment in which violence doesn't work. If it continues to work, then there's no reason for them to let go of it, basically. The other point that is important to make, and this relates to trauma, that if you are violent, that means that you hurt other people. If you hurt other people, you can't unhurt them once you've done it. And you can think about the scale of you know, hurting other people, obviously. But this is extremely traumatizing. Because once you've hurt someone, that's it. You can't go back on it. You can't pretend it didn't happen. You've done it. And that means that psychologically, you need somewhere inside you, even if you don't acknowledge it at all, you need to cope with having hurt someone. You need to cope with having damaged someone else's body, which is an awful thing. Now, the easiest way to cope with this is to do it again. Because if you stop, then you need to take stock. You look back, you need to take stock of the damage that you have created. Now, if you don't stop, you don't need to do that. So, really, you can think about kind of that once you hurt someone, escalation, maybe paradoxically, if you look in perspective, but escalation will be the best mechanism to deal with it in order to avoid the guilt of the damage you inflicted. Now, the more you escalate, the more damage you inflict. The more damage you inflict, the more incentive you have not to stop. So if you really want to, if you think about it, it's more kind of fits with addiction models a bit more. But that means that in order to stop, you need to be stopped. You're not going to stop yourself. You need to be stopped in a way that allows you then to take stock of what had happened. If you stop, put in prison, it means that you need to continue to be violent in a different place, basically. That in a way, prison is kind of a sanctuary to never feel guilty again. And you know, with your young people, that the minute you get to the point in which they let you in and kind of break down, this is usually where they go. They suddenly notice what had happened. Not only what had happened to them, but what they'd done to other people.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, definitely. I think, can you hear me? Because I can't.
You want to say something, Craig?
Can you hear me?
Hello, Amanda.
Yeah.
Can you
hear?
We can kind of hear you. You keep coming in and out.
Okay. I went to a conference in Belfast, and there were some people from Norway there. No.
See, I jinxed myself earlier, and I said everything was working fine, and then we just had technical issues after that. Yeah, we can hear you.
The Norwegian Trauma and Violence
No, your signal keeps coming in and out.
Okay.
No, I was saying that definitely resonates with me. I mean, I was working with a young man that all he wanted to do was shoot people. And one of the things that I couldn't understand was why. I think everyone just mentioned that idea about in order to stop is to be stopped. That was the conclusion that I almost came to, because I kind of felt for the first time in all of my years of practice, there was nothing that I could physically do or say that was going to change his mind from wanting to hurt individuals that lived within the area that I possibly lived. And it was almost like the only way that he would stop is if someone took his life or someone removed him from the community for a long period of time. And it's actually a sad state of affairs that I'm starting to see a pattern with a lot of young people that look up and idolize to individuals like that, where they see that type of behavior and lifestyle and want to almost imitate, because they feel that or believe that that's the only way to live in these types of environments. So it's definitely a lot of stuff that you've definitely given me to think about in terms of this idea of trauma and this conversation about individuals taking on personalities in order to deal with that trauma. But I totally agree. In order for the violence to stop, you need to put individuals in environments where violence doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And this is where things like rites of passage becomes very important. You know, going back to a lot of ancient and historical ways of bringing men through the village and teaching them how to be men, or teaching women how to be women. And I think a lot of that has been disconnected in community. A lot of faith-based institutions don't do the things that they used to do in terms of, you know, dealing with young boys or young girls, in terms of developing them to adolescence to adulthood. And I think there's a lot of things that are missing within our communities in which we need to turn back to. A lot of the solutions are actually here. It's just a way of, I guess, when you said earlier about trying to find ways of people engaging with this agenda, it's just finding a way of whose role and what role can we play in order to engage with this, because it's a really, really difficult issue. And then a lot of workers that I know that are on the front line that are engaging with young men like the one that I've just mentioned feel disheartened. You know, they're losing hope. They can't see any way of engaging with our young people. You know, there's been 2 murders over the weekend, over the last couple of weeks. And again, people are just kind of feeling like, what do they do next? You know, what is the next strategy? And the strategy shouldn't always just be that we need a criminal justice response or a punitive response. There has to be other ways. And I guess part and part of this discussion and part of the work that needs to be done is what to do next. Because the reality for most is that we can't remove young people from the community tonight. We can't remove young people and in an idealistic situation put them in places where that violence won't work. So I guess is, well, what are the alternatives until the point where we're able to do so? And I think that's my major concern, because I think when people look at things from a major scale, as in, well, I can't remove an individual from the community now, it's like, well, what else is there to do? And I think that there is other ways. It's just how can we come together with the knowledge and understanding to create something where young people or workers or parents that have direct experience with these people, what can they do better to safeguard not just themselves but also the individuals that they're amongst.
And I think you hit on some really valid points, and one of my personal beliefs on how we start to get to grips with what's going on in the community again is that spreading knowledge. So when we're looking and we're seeing a situation, we can see it from different depths and from different perspectives. So we're not just, you know, feeling overwhelmed, we're not feeling helpless, we're not feeling fear, but actually we can start to actually this is what's going on, like what Ariel just said, or, you know, the violence getting more and more extreme as a coping mechanism to deal with, you know, what you've done. And I think I want to just take apart something that you said just a minute ago, when you said with these, you have other young people that come up and start to imitate the violence. Ariel, I was wondering if you could maybe pick that apart a little bit more, because is there something within the trauma, or am I off point there?
No, I think possibly it is. And I think a lot of young people, specifically those that I've just mentioned, those individuals look at these individuals as almost what they would call the triple G, the double G, or whatever it is, the individual that is well known for committing certain acts. But in reality, what they're almost saying is, I need to respond like this in order for me to be safe within my environment, in order for me to be safe. So when they might be rapping or acting a particular way, talking about they're going to do this, and if they see it up, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. what they're really saying is, if I come against any opposition, if I come against anybody that is going to pose a threat to myself, I am willing to absolutely do anything that is considered extreme in order to exterminate that individual from myself, or me feeling any form of fear. So the imitation, I believe, is a coping strategy. It indeed is. But again, when the young people, which I guess I work with and some of yourselves may work with, they almost glamorize the behavior as something that is almost normal. And I think the imitation, again, I agree, is that coping strategy. I don't think it's something that they innately want to do. Rather, it's a response, a reactive response from something that they think or experience every single day. Because the reality is, most young people don't want to do 35 years in prison. The reality is, none of them want to die. None of them want to get stabbed, and none of them want to get shot. But in order to demonstrate that I feel safe, secure, and I seem like I am in with the crew or the squad, I'm going to need to behave like this in a range of different ways that one ensures my safety and my friend's safety.
And Ariel, do you have anything to add?
Just, I think, I mean, it's important to look at it socially and psychologically. And I would look at imitators. You know, I can't. If you look at imitators from a social point of view, let's say, then you know, why shouldn't they imitate? Of course, you know, they in every sort of social group has its heroes and need to have its heroes and superheroes. And if you live in a certain area and you kind of belong to a certain wider group or sub-social section, you know, what other alternatives do you have, basically, in order to empower yourself and feel that you belong to something which has strength and initiative and assertiveness? What else will you align yourself? Who's going to be your hero or your superhero? You know, usually it's kind of really powerful people. And this is what you go for. But another way to think about these things is as a group process. And then you have, you know, all these rings around the gang, you know, not all gang affiliated people are criminals. A lot of them just want to feel safe and that belong to something and to somebody. What other alternatives would they have, basically, other than to find a way in order to belong to such a group? That will be, in terms of their kind of, let's say, if you think about adolescent development, if you're an adolescent living in a place which is quite dangerous to walk around in, looking at what ideas you want to kind of hold on to, what would you like to do when you grow up, feeling under threat, feeling that you need to be hypervigilant all the time. It's really difficult to work this out in any other way. There's a lot of, if you can think about, there will be threat and trauma on one hand, and a lot of temptation and glory on the other hand. So it's really difficult to work this one out in a benign way, you know, to deal with the threat in a benign psychological way where you feel protected and safe because there are adults there who are looking after you, or you can look after yourself without getting hurt. And on the other hand, not to glamorize anything, not to feel you know, tempted to try this or try that or do this or do that. And before you know it, you're somehow affiliated, excited, doing something. And once you do it, as we said before, you can't undo it.
And I want to go touch back on something that Craig said previously about none of these young people want to do life in prison. None of these young people want to die, or, you know. But do we have a situation at times where some of our young people are suicidal, even if they don't quite understand it, could that also be an effect of the trauma and putting themselves in situations where they are in, their life is in danger? Is that also an effect of trauma? Sorry, bear with me while I plug in my laptop.
I think so. And I think that when a lot of young people have a particular rhetoric or narrative about wanting to do, I guess, extreme forms of violence in order to resolve a particular conflict, and they may say things like, yeah, I'm down to do 35 years, I'm down to get killed for this. I think that is on the borderline of suicidal thoughts, because what they're saying is that society or individuals within society have failed to respond to my needs, or to failed to hear my voice, and I have no other solution. And my solution is the violence. And I think, like Ariel said earlier, is that in order sometimes for the violence to stop from these individuals is to be stopped, and that's the only solution that they possibly see at that time. So I do think that that's on the borderline of suicidal thoughts, because it's almost like, well, I'd rather be killed than be killed. And you hear them talk about it often. You hear them talk about it in their music. I'd rather get caught with my gun than without it. I'd rather get caught with the shank than without it. I'd rather get rich or die trying. I'm this very nihilistic thought process in terms of the way that they perceive the world. And ultimately, those that don't unfortunately take their lives, or those that don't get killed within the processes and end up in prison, when you actually have conversations with them, a lot of them don't want to be there. A lot of them don't like the fact that for the next 30 years of their life they have to spend behind bars. And like you said earlier, 23 hours in the cell without a TV is not supporting the idea anyway. But I think the rhetoric that we're seeing community from a lot of them is generally out of fear, generally out of a response of a failure or a deficit in the community in which we have been unable to respond to. I'm not too sure what Ariel's idea is. I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective on that one.
Go on, Ariel.
I'm not sure. I think a lot has to be said about sort of group processes and social processes where you live in a certain environment and you need to cope with it the best way you can. Now, if you're a soldier in the trenches, you're not going to be. You might be dreaming on some sort of a future, but you're not going to hang a lot of hopes on it. You're going to, what you see, I'll say, in a way what I've said before, that what you usually see in people and what they do, you see them coping with something else. So if you are at some place in yourself absolutely terrified of dying, you might glorify it. You might become kind of the best at not caring about whether you live or die, as it were. You might find a way of kind of inoculating yourself against the pain of death or the fear of being dead. And you just desensitize as much as possible. Yeah. And you act. Because if you stop acting, you start feeling a bit more, which is a problem. And a lot of these young people are locked into these cycles of action, because if they stop, they break. If they stop, they feel the trauma of what they do, they feel the trauma of what had been done to them.
It's definitely a lot to think about. So when we look at now working with these young people that are expressing their trauma, they're expressing their trauma through violence, whether it's in the community or in the prison system, how do us as practitioners work with these particular young people? What do we feel is the way forward? What needs to be done? What can we share with other practitioners out there for them to be able to start developing the skills to be able to deal with these young people that are, we said it last week, potentially addicted to violence or using their trauma to become more and more extreme in order to cope with the trauma. Sorry, what do you do?
Well, if there's
I used to go first.
just aware that I'll have to stop in about 7 minutes.
Sorry.
And do something else. But one thing to say, you know, we can all get caught up in thinking sort of top down on it, which is really important to do, and thinking what's missing and what we'd like to see, and how it doesn't work, as it were, and how come prisons are like they are, and all that stuff that we know very well. But we can also think little steps. And what I know about your work, Whitney, is what you do eventually, through a long process sometimes, is get young people to care about something. The minute they care about something, they feel they're in a completely different place. They have a different relationship. And it's all about this kind of painstaking investing in relationships with people who might not necessarily want to have a relationship with you at all. Don't want to hear from you, don't want to know what you're there to offer them. What you're there to offer them is a bit of a risk for them to take.
Yeah.
So then they need to let go of all these things that they are holding on to. But this is it. It's all, if you think relationally, you think it's all about relationships. This is where the trauma is. This is where coping with the trauma is. And this is where the solution is as well. And if you have people kind of on the ground who are making these relationships, and you support these people well, through a ring of containment, with a lot of people involved in various angles, but forming teams as they work, you can get some results, as you know. You do get results. The hopeful thing is people change, surprisingly, but they do.
They do.
You know? They do. It's harder. It's sometimes easier to do it in prison because there's violence in prison, maybe a bit less temptation.
So I'm going to bring you in a minute, Craig. I'm aware that you need to leave, Ariel. Is there anything any kind of last remarks, last words that you want to say, any thing that you're involved with that you want to promote at the moment for others to be able to get involved with? Give us your last words.
I'm involved as a clinician. I'm involved as someone who can consult other people as they work. I would love to have an opportunity to do direct work, but I think, as we talked about, Whitney, it would take a lot of groundwork for someone to be ready to become a patient. And maybe, paradoxically, when they're ready to become a patient, they might not need to be. But what I learned from working with Whitney is that I can be extremely influential, and I can do proper clinical work without seeing people individually. That it's still very powerful, that it's still very influential and important to do that. And if we manage to form teams that do all these things and contain each other in their work, then something really significant can happen even without huge systems. Just with people who work together and help each other.
Well, thank you very much for taking time out on your incredibly busy schedule.
My pleasure.
Yeah, just thank you for joining the conversation. Everything you said was just amazing, and it was great to have your perspective as well. So thank you. We'll be in touch within the next 24 hours anyway, and I look forward to speaking to you then. But yeah, just thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, Craig. Let me just see. Amanda, are you still around? If you're around, try dialing in again. Everyone else who's trying to dial in.
See Carol Davis in there as well. Jump in, Carol.
Yeah, Carol, jump in if you would like to. I think Amanda's having a few connection issues. We can kind of hear you.
Amanda.
Oh, Right, go on, Craig.
Well, I just wanted to pick up to your question of what can we or what do we do as practitioners in order to respond to the violence. I mean, that's in terms of my growth and development, that was something I always struggled with. And I guess that was part of the reason why I left statutory organisations, because I felt that I wasn't responding to the trauma. Mm-hmm. And then even when I left the city council and I started my own thing, I still kind of felt that I wasn't doing enough, hence why I kind of continued my study. I'd done a master's degree, a diploma and whatnot. And I only can talk about my personal experience in terms of the young guys that I've worked with that are on the extreme end of gang violence. One of the things that I've tend to find that's been quite consistent is faith-based intervention. Mm-hmm. And giving young people, young men, almost like a new blueprint into how they live their lives. And I tend to find that a lot of young men respond quite well to that, because it's not so much about what you're telling them to do, or you're almost telling them about the consequences, rather than this is an actual blueprint that can really desist you away from criminality. Mm-hmm. And just to kind of add that, those that are probably listening or watching and thinking about how faith-based intervention works, is not to also take away the reality of what these young men are going through. So I'm not suggesting at all that faith somehow socio-economic status. No way am I saying that your issues around or engaging in a faith somehow deals with every other issue around your violence and your trauma. No, it does not. And I think that there's an aftercare that needs to take place once a person feels that they've desisted or wants to desist from criminality through faith. And I think much work needs to be done, because sometimes a lot of us think that when a person embraces some particular faith or becomes spiritual, that their issues are somehow gone, and they're not. I think what it does do, though, is it peels back a layer in which a lot of other interventions hasn't worked. And I think I've seen a lot of that with a lot of young guys that are probably gone into prison, and individuals that have come out that really want to change and embrace a faith and do make those changes. And again, I'm not suggesting that faith is the thing that eradicates absolutely everything, because we do know with certain groups in society struggle on a range of different things, from housing, from education, from healthcare, from politics, etc., etc. So it's important to just acknowledge that also. But I have found personally that faith-based intervention, using faith as a tool to desist young people from violence, has been quite effective and been quite consistent also.
I agree. I think there is a lot more space for conversation, and I would like to see more conversation about faith and what does faith mean happening in the prison system, because I think it's a good space for it, and there's a lot of time and energy that can be put there. I do know that Raymond is looking to do a few seminars this month as well, Raymond Douglas, and I know one of the seminars he would like to do is looking at faith-based interventions, but also the radicalization and the extremist side of things as well. And we'll probably touch on what happening in the prison systems as well. So I'm not going to go into too much depth in that. Carol, are you around? You kind of came and then went.
Yeah, we just seen her for a second and then she just disappeared again.
Yes.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Can you hear me? Introduce yourself. Say hello.
Hi, I'm Carol. From Wolverhampton. I've met Craig before, so it's lovely to meet you. Sorry, I'm having technical problems. Very much on the trauma, trying to tell everybody about trauma and how we need to be looking at that more importantly with our youth. So letting me join.
And what have your thoughts and feelings on the matter at the moment? I've been seeing you commenting a lot in the messages. Feedback to us.
Okay. Yeah, I've just been on trauma and the impacts on our young people and adults as well, really, and the fact that I very much believe that violence is a public health issue, and I really want people to take this on board and to start to look at this when we work with young people, especially with youth violence. Quite frustrating in the sense that young people are very much looked at as criminals more so than people who need time to sit and be worked with. So it's quite new to me, Whitney, to be sort of out on Blab as such and talking, you know, out loud. I'm quite a quiet person that just sort of keeps bashing away to get people. But I really think if we could get out there and sort of do a conference or talk to people in a bigger way, then maybe people will listen.
And I think going back to the point I said earlier, Whitney, is that there's so many different levels and a way that we can address. And I think, like Carol said, I think it would be good for us to be in the building. You know, I've never done anything with you before. It's funny enough.
It's bad, isn't it?
Is an events together, but we've never done anything. You know, it's only because we was running a national conference that I got to meet Carol finally. And I think that there's so many of us that are doing impressive work across the country, and I think that we need to strategically do something together that kind of hits on every level. So maybe it's a thing where, I don't know, we develop something in terms of like a toolkit, and you know, we use a conference to catapult a program, even if those of us that are not possibly physically possible, but at least we have a contribution towards it. And I think there's just so many things that, because of what we know, I think we have a responsibility at another level, because we were able to reach those levels to do something, as well as continue to do the brilliant works in our community. So I do think that maybe a different conversation outside of here needs to take place about, well, what should our next step be? Because I don't think there's much research that really looks at as well some of the stuff that we're talking about. And again, too many times I've seen, you know, people kind of jump on the bandwagon of some of the issues that we're talking, and they do big things with it. And one thing that I always say to people is that at the level in which we're speaking right now, we are not in the building at the places where it's important. We're not in the building. You know, we have these brilliant conversations, these informative discussions, but we're not in the building.
So what's the building? What building do we need to be in?
A space in which we're all together. I don't know where, but I'm sure with all of our minds we can definitely make it happen. Maybe we do a Birmingham, Wolverhampton, I don't know, London link up.
I'll come to Birmingham, I don't mind.
You know, and I think a lot of us now are in position now where we can do stuff. You know, I've been blessed now to be in a university, you know, brand new state-of-the-art university where, you know, our platform's there, you know, so we can make things happen. It's just, I guess, for me, one of the things that I struggle with at a lot of conferences is that people leaving without something tangible, because I always think of all of the levels when people come into our spaces. So that's why I'm suggesting that maybe, I don't know, some of us come up with a toolkit in responding to violence, you know, violence interrupted, trauma kit. I don't know, we all can contribute one way or another. And I think that, you know, there's so many avenues now to publish things. We have the ability to do it, because, you know, when I have conversations with a lot of practitioners from America, they're far ahead in terms of doing things. And I think that we are so sharp, and we just really, really let ourselves down in terms of the things that we put out there. We're brilliant from a practitioner base. I think we 10 out of 10. But in terms of things that are tangible, I think that's one thing as a collective we struggle with. Individuals have things, but as a collective, I think we struggle with. So that might be, you know, something that this conversation today has created, that makes us think a little bit more closely about, okay, well, what can we do now? And I think now you've kind of pushed me now that I want to get down to London, hopefully by the end of the year, so we can take that conversation a little bit forward about, well, what can we do? Not so much just as a conference, because conferences are quite easy because of who we are and who we're exposed to, but more so about, well, what can we produce? Yeah. So whether we can produce something and then people take that and then run with it, I'm more than happy to support and be a part of that.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And to me, one of the reasons why it was important to start talking online and having these kind of platforms, because it feels like it's the first step towards being able to develop some more product and some more training to get out there, and not to do it to make a quick buck, but to do it to actually make change. And already, I mean, we had Ariel from the Portman Clinic, so we've had a lot of support from this, from the Tavistock and Portman Clinic. The Huffington Post are willing to support and help get the message out. I need to write my article for them. But it is about bringing all the right people together and having everyone in the building, but also being able to think about things more strategically, because a lot of the times we get caught up in the survival of our field. And, you know, while we're on the subject of trauma, it is part of the secondary trauma for us as practitioners to get so caught up in murder, death, stabbing. You know, there's a lot of negativity that we have to deal with. There's a lot of trauma that we have to deal with. And a lot of the times we get so caught up in being in London or being in Birmingham or just being able to survive in our day-to-day work that we don't get a chance to reach out. We don't get a chance to connect. So to me, this was that first step. And I hate being on camera, and, you know, I like to be introverted in my house with all my books. But I do think it's time that we need to step forward and start making
behind you that you've written or we've written, or you know, these are the things. And I think for me now, you know, you mentioned the word strategy. That's something I've really been thinking about over the last 12 months. I think in terms of the practice, I'm in a position now where I want to just train people in terms of, you know, doing similar types of work that myself, like Ray and others, have done in the community. And I'm really now thinking a little bit more strategic about, okay, let's do let's do some research, let's do an academic paper, you know, let's write a book. And I'm not saying that that's the be all and end all, but I'm trying to think of different ways of responding to the issue. And I think sometimes, like you said, that we're caught up, you know, doing our own thing, that we forget about other things that are important. Again, we know that community that we can engage. We know that we can engage with individuals on the street within the criminal justice system, those that are the victims of the criminal justice system. So let's try and sharpen our swords in other arenas, you know, arenas that we're possibly not used to. And I think that's part of where we kind of need to move towards. And, you know, let's try it, you know, just to see how we get on. I mean, I'm putting my hand out there and I'm saying that I'm down. I'm willing to support anything. I just think that for me now, speaking to a lot of parents recently after these last couple of murders, people want things that are tangible. You know, people things that they can take and do something with it, as opposed to just the general rhetoric. And yes, the talking and that it has its place in a range of different ways. But I think there's something else that we just need to try that we're not doing enough. That's all I'm saying.
And I think we owe it to the parents of those who have lost their children, both, you know, to violence and to the criminal justice system, because the parents are losing on both sides. Carol, is there any kind of, I think I might finish a little earlier today. Is there any last, pardon?
I've got to shoot as well. I've got another appointment in a minute.
That's all right. Well, Carol, I just
wanted to say I agree totally with what you're saying, Craig, and yourself, Whitney. I think for me, as a practitioner, what I'm seeing is when I'm trying to talk to people about trauma in this, people are finding it quite a new. If it was sexual violence or something else, they would be taking it on board a lot quicker. So I'm wondering when we're trying to put the information out there, if we can sort of bring together states that will be able to then fund things, so that we've got a longer term approach when working with people and adults. There seems to be so much a raising of awareness that we need to do just for people to be able to take it on board that our young people are experiencing trauma, you know. But if you look back at the history of violence and the impact that it has on, but I just think it's a drip process. But I'd be happy to help with anything I can to try and raise awareness in any way at all.
So yeah, well, thank you very much, and this is great because I've recorded you both saying this now. So yeah, I have evidence. But thank you.
I wrote in the chat that Whitney needs to write a book called Violence Interrupted.
All right, I will start that tonight. I think I've already got a few chapters. So
I've got a chapter for you as well.
Yeah, we will talk on the bat phone. But thank you both so much for being involved. Craig, thank you I know you rushed home to get involved this week, so thank you. I truly appreciate it. Please keep promoting it throughout the week. to everyone else watching, we'll be back next week. If there is a demand, I might put it back until 7 o'clock. I only did it at 6 o'clock because I get up incredibly early on a Tuesday morning, so I need as much time as possible on a Monday night. But if people do ask, I will put it back. And yeah, get involved, tweet me, use the hashtag Violence Interrupted UK, just so we can see how it is spreading. Also, I'm happy to answer any questions. If there's any questions that you want raised on next week's show, next week will be specifically around the knife and the gun crime that's happening, and looking at how we read that and how we respond to that. So if you have any questions, let me know. Also, I'm happy to do a bit around books and different books and training that you can go on in London or across the UK to get more information and advice. But I think that is pretty much everything. I will upload this to YouTube so people can watch it again. Please spread it to all your networks so we can create a movement. And thank you very much, and have a great Monday evening.
Yeah.
Thank you. And bye.